Hello and welcome back to the Hat Collecting YouTube channel. This is a bit of a different thing, doing kind of a mini episode here. I had Nadi on episode 13 way back when, and I did actually ask about this topic, but it wasn't prepared, and so we decided it would be better to kind of come back to it later with a bit more preparation so we could do the topic justice. So welcome back, Nadi, from episode 13 of Hat Collecting. We're going to do a little, I'm not sure what to call this yet, like a hat companion or like a mini hat or something, but we're going to talk about relationship anarchy, or kind of, alternatives to the standard kind of monogamous relationship. And I'm going to give Natty the opportunity to, I'm going to ask a few specific questions and give Natty the opportunity to answer them. And yeah, like, I'm glad that we're getting to talk about this because, as I've said on the main show, one of the goals and one of the core kind of values of hat collecting is to learn from other people's experiences and kind of share those insights and that wisdom, and give people something a little bit different to think about that might work better for them. I'm not saying that this necessarily is better. I mean, it's just another option for people to consider.
I just want to say, I'm not an expert in this topic. I've done most of my learning sort of in the field or through talking to other people or having discussions, and less through reading literature and stuff like that. So if you don't take everything I say as a representation of the whole community. Some good resources include, there's the Relationship Anarchy Manifesto, and then there's the RA Smorgasbord. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. It's also a fun resource.
So the first question that I wanted to ask is, how do you personally define relationship anarchy, and does your personal definition differ from any more commonly accepted definitions or understandings?
Yeah, I'll start off by saying that I don't know the official or kind of accepted definition, but I'm just going to speak from my own experience and my own sort of understandings. So, relationship anarchy is first and foremost a philosophy of life, more so than it's just a relationship style, such as, polyamory or something like that. So, it comes from anarchism principles. It basically applies those concepts and ideas and practices from anarchism to interpersonal relationships. Basically, there's a rejection of societal norms or societal, expectations. It discusses basically any relationships between people. It could be platonic, romantic, sexual, even familial or professional. So it kind of, it's very broad. It's not just a very specific narrow type of relationship. And it basically is the idea that any sort of agreements or terms or boundaries set between two people is kind of entirely up to them. It's not influenced by social norms or third parties or expectations that are ingrained in society. For example, if you're just platonic friends, you can't do this, or this, or you must do this, or that. It rejects that and says, why don't we take what each person kind of wants to do and find the intersection of that and, base the relationship off of that rather than a prescriptive definition of what that has to be. I find that relationship anarchy thus allows people to be more autonomous and sort of set their own boundaries, only do what they're comfortable with, and not try to meet a predefined role. Another thing I really like about relationship anarchy is that it doesn't distinguish, it doesn't prioritize certain relationships over others. For example, this idea of amatonormativity assumes that everyone wants the same thing, which is one person, one primary relationship that they live with, they intertwine their lives with, and prioritize over everyone else. So it kind of rejects that and says, well, why should, for example, romantic relationships be the most important relationship, or why should, one person by default be more important just because you live with them or something like that. So basically, It's the idea that you can build your own relationships, you can take elements that you like and elements that you dislike and create that with people
It's
consensually.
based on what you've kind of said there. Like, this is a newer concept to me. I've kind of only learned about it for the first time the last few years, mainly through making a lot more queer friends who tend to kind of define their relationships a bit more differently and a bit more by their terms. And so you reminded me of this concept I've heard, particularly kind of in like the polyamory community. They call it the relationship escalator, or this is expectation that when you start a new relationship with someone, whether it's like platonic or whatever, that there's these expected steps that you always have to move up the ladder towards, and not everybody wants that all the time. So what I kind of get from what you've said and what I understand of this is, like, as you kind of were alluding to, that you get to define each relationship by your terms, by the terms that you and the other person agree to. And that can take many different forms. And so you don't have to kind of deal with things that, I mean, there's certain things you'll always have to deal with. Communication is always important in a relationship, but there might be other aspects of a relationship that you may both not want, and then you both don't have to have in that case. Would that be an accurate assessment, in your opinion?
Yeah, exactly. So, for example, a common relationship escalator sort of thing would be to eventually move in together, meet each other's parents, and then maybe get married, maybe have kids. This is for, traditional romantic relationships. However, yeah, if you're a relationship anarchist, maybe you don't want certain aspects. Maybe you want to have kids with a platonic friend. Maybe you want to not move in with a romantic partner. There's so many combinations. And, I say romantic partner, I mean, if you define it that way, because a lot of times the lines can be blurry. But yeah, so you can just pick and choose what you want, what you don't want. You can decide, well, I just want to see this person maybe once a month because I'm really busy. And they sort of like agree with that, whatever it is.
But the next question here on my list is, how long have you identified as a relationship anarchist, and how did you determine it was right for you?
Before I even heard about relationship anarchy or like knew that it was a concept at all, I think I basically lived it my whole life. Like I basically aligned with that sort of view without even realizing that it was a thing. So when I first heard about it in 2015, I was actually a bit skeptical because I was like thinking, well, is it just a rebranding of polyamory, or is it just a way to sound cool? Like, oh, I'm a relationship anarchist, and so like I was a bit skeptical, but then I read more about it, and I really kind of dug into it and realized like, wow, this is actually legit. It has solid roots, and even though it's relatively a new like sort of concept by name, it's kind of existed for a while without having a name. Basically, around that time, I had already heard of solo polyamory, which in a nutshell is just being solo means that you don't intertwine your life with any romantic partners or any people in general, so you don't tend to build a home and or get married or something or anything like that, but you can still have deep intimate relationships. So yeah, so at the time I thought, okay, well that kind of describes me, but I still felt a bit iffy about the fact that polyamory prioritizes or kind of separates romantic relationships from other relationships. So that didn't exactly sit well with me because it kind of didn't make sense because I really prioritize first and foremost being having a close friendship with people, and then any other elements can come and go or be part of it. Yeah, so since then, I've kind of identified primarily as that. And I even got a tattoo in 2018 of the Relationship Anarchy heart. And also it's in rainbow color to represent, being queer. So
And yeah, it kind of occurs to me that in a sense that, like, well, I guess it's become very apparent, a lot of people during this pandemic situation, a lot of people stuck in lockdown, a lot more people have been now made kind of aware or made more aware of their need for like physical touch as like a love language and as something that they just like need essentially to kind of be happy. And you know, for people who are single or maybe have gone through breakups during the pandemic, and now they find themselves isolated and not able to get any kind of like, and not to say that, you know, it has to be a physical thing with relationships, but for a lot of people suddenly being stuck in these lockdown situations and not even being able to, so the point that I was thinking of that spawned this was thinking that if we were more comfortable, I guess at least in Western society, I'm not sure about other cultures around the world, but here in North America, if we were more comfortable, like, you know, cuddling with friends or doing things that are generally considered more like, oh, you only do that with like a romantic partner or a sexual partner. And if we were more generally comfortable with doing those sorts of things with anyone that we are kind of, you know, have a decent connection with or whatever, I think that would have been pretty helpful for a lot more people during the pandemic. And it's kind of unfortunate that these monogamous centric values and conventions have kind of hurt some people, I think, through this. I don't know if that's something that you would like to comment on at all, or if you want to go to the next question.
Yes, actually, I would, because that's a very good point, and that's a perfect example of something that relationship anarchy could help. You know, if because of the a lot of the lockdown rules sort of assume that you live with, you know, a family or a loved one, and they, you know, a lot of people live with roommates, and if they had a more open sort of communication and you know had this outlook that it's okay to cuddle with you know, roommates or people you don't have a specific intimate relationship with, and if they, you know, agreed to just, you know, be cuddle buddies during lockdown periods or something like that, that's a perfect example of approaching life in an RA sort of way. So yeah, good point.
Yeah, I know a few people that are going through that, and unfortunately, I have gone through a breakup in this pandemic, and I definitely kind of noticed that. It's like, oh man, it sucks to have that, and then just it's just gone, and you can't replace it, really. And you know, I'm not even the most like I'm not even like, touch isn't as much a love language for me as it is for some people, so I can only imagine how hard it would be for some other people. The next question here on the list, I've only got four total, so we're a little over halfway through now. What do you think some people maybe misunderstand or get wrong about relationship anarchy?
So the obvious one that first comes to mind is the word anarchy. There's a lot of sort of negative misconceptions about it. So people might think, oh, well, that means like a free for all, or, you know, um, chaos or selfishness or something like that. And it's really not the case. Um, so I actually find that people who practice RA tend to be better at communication, for example, because nothing is assumed, you know, just because someone's your boyfriend or something like that doesn't mean certain things. So there's a lot more open communication and clarification of things. So it's really not everyone out for themselves. It's more of a community and a wider network of loved ones that you could have with this philosophy. And another thing is, again, oh, maybe relationship anarchists are afraid of commitment. That's like a common one from people who are maybe have a primary relationship, for example, which means, you know, a partner that they share their life with, and then they can sort of have other secondary partners. So, yeah, again, that's not the case. Relationship anarchy really allows for so many pretty much infinite combinations. So some relationship anarchists do choose to live together or have kids together or, you know, have lifelong friendships or relationships. That's totally part of it. And some might choose not to. And that's also, you know, something that should be okay to decide, right? And finally, another misconception, it's that, oh, it's just a rebranding of polyamory. Again, it's more like the relationship anarchy is more like the why, where polyamory is just one of the hows. So relationship anarchy can really look like anything. It could look like polyamory, or it could look like, you know, being single, or, there's so many different things. It's more like the philosophy behind it. And while there's definitely an overlap between the two communities, as I realized, it almost doesn't make sense sometimes to use polyamorous language to relationship anarchy. For example, asking someone, well, how many partners do you have? It's kind of nonsensical, because what is a partner? What counts, what doesn't, like, it kind of makes no sense in that realm.
Yeah, one thought that I wanted to offer, sort of from my side, not that I'm necessarily presenting the opposing side, I'm just the more every person, trying to, like what I do with my Curiosity Guide series, I like to try to take a bigger, complex topic and try to distill it down into something a bit more accessible. And through help with guests, that's what I try to do. But um, we were kind of saying, like, people might think that the anarchy means that it's like really selfish and kind of and destructive maybe, but I think really what, because that word is a very like loaded word, but the way that I kind of see it from my understanding is that the anarchy part is more just rejecting the expected normals and norms and conventions, as opposed to being selfish. You're just, no, like, this is like constricting, and this is limiting, and this doesn't work for me. And it's not at all that these people are being like, I'm just going to do what I want and heck with everyone else. It's just, no, these particular parameters don't work for me. But it's still, like you said, it's still consensual, and the two people involved have to communicate and decide what they both agree on. Another thing that one of my friends said to me recently, um, was like, because the relationship that I was in, I do technically identify as non-monogamous, although I've never been in multiple relationships. But I know that some people are kind of insecure about that. And one of my friends made a comment to me, and I tried to find the origin of this quote, but I have not been successful as of yet. But they said to me that commitment is not about exclusivity, it's about follow through. And that really struck me, because I do think that a lot of people do think of, like, that's one of the things I actually don't like about monogamy, is that a lot of people treat it like an ownership thing, and that's where the jealousy comes from. Like, you can't talk to my partner; they're my partner. They might like you better and leave me. It's like, but that's like insecurity, and that's kind of where that comes from. And so, I think if you kind of can get to a place of more, you just, there's that whole idea of compersion. Like, you want the people that you care about to be happy, even if it's not necessarily with you or because of you. You hope that they do still, come back to you at the end of the day, kind of thing, or whatever the case may be. But I just thought I wanted to put that idea out there for people to rethink that idea of commitment, and get away from that idea of the exclusivity. Although maybe that works for you in your case, that's valid. But that's just sort of, I wanted to kind of put that idea out from kind of my side of things for people to consider. If you want to offer any other thoughts on that, you can, before I'll move on to the last question here.
Sure. Yeah, just a quick one. I really like this idea of follow through. Um, One example, or one application of relationship anarchy, is exactly that. You kind of you treat each group of two people. I don't know how to put it. Like, each each relationship you have with other people, you treat as sort of like its own unit. And are the needs being met? Are the expectations being met? And beyond that, it doesn't really matter what happens with other people, as long as those needs are met with with each person, if that makes any sense. So any third parties, they shouldn't have like veto power over your other relationships. That's a huge part of it.
Yeah, and I actually did do an interview with somebody many years back for a previous project, that I interviewed someone who was identified as poly, and or polyamorous, I should say, because poly is to be reserved for Polynesians, I believe now. But they were saying how there's this misconception that polyamory means that you're not like committed to people, that you can just kind of go do whatever you want again. But that's where that sort of follow through comes through. Like, you make a commitment to somebody, and yes, maybe you'll go on dates with other people or whatever, but that's kind of why I said, like, and it wasn't maybe the best choice of words to say, like, you always come home to this person at the end of the day, but it's that sort of idea that, yeah, you're not owned. There's no like leash necessarily in the metaphorical sense, but your actions ultimately, you do like whatever agreement you've made with the person, you don't break that trust. And that's more what matters versus that idea of the exclusivity. But yeah, the last question here on the list, is there any advice that you would give or that you might have for others who might be interested in exploring some of these relationship alternatives?
Yeah, the first thing I would say, regardless of what relationship type or style or anything people are starting, is to sort of start slow. And what I mean by that is do some research, and especially if you are in already sort of intimate or traditional relationships, that you have a lot of discussion and a lot of clarification of what each person is okay with, and what's a boundary, etc. And if you aren't starting from that sort of more traditional place, it's still good to know what to say to any potential maybe dates or people you might get closer to. So definitely keep that in mind. And one thing that I always try to emphasize is it's okay if you're not a relationship anarchist. You know, it's okay if you want a primary partner. It's okay if you want hierarchy. Just be clear with that. Any people that might apply to in your life. So if you find that relationship anarchy itself is not it, it's not the thing for you, that's cool. Maybe an open relationship is, maybe something else is. So, and one final thing kind of is to just be open to change and fluidity. These things could change over time. Maybe your views can change over time, or your relationships change over time, of course. So just be open to the fact that it's not always going to look the same, and it's not always going to look exactly how you want it to, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely good advice, and I'm glad that we got to have this talk in a more prepared way, and that I feel like we gave it its fair due and did it justice. And anyone that's watching this, because this is not going to be going out on the podcast feed, this is going to be more of like YouTube channel exclusive. But if anyone watching this has any kind of questions or thoughts or any observations or whatever, feel free to leave a comment or even, tweet at me or whatever on social media. Yeah, I'm happy with kind of what we did here, and I hope that people learn something. And even if they don't necessarily change the way that they do relationships, at least maybe they'll be a little bit more open-minded and accepting of other people's choices in that regard. So thank you for joining me again. Yeah, as I've taken to saying on the main show, thank you for watching. Stay curious, keep collecting those hats, keep learning with us, and yeah, feel free to head over. Hatcollecting.com is the website. Patreon.com/ArtemisCreates, which is going to be where the kind of bonus content goes. And stay tuned for the next episode of Hat Collecting, which will be coming out sometime soon.